were reading The Old Woman Who Named Things by Catherine Brown. Once there was an old woman who loved to name things. She named the old car she drove Betsy, the old chair she sat in Fred, she named the old bed she slept on Roxanne, and she named her old house Franklin. Every morning she would get out of Roxanne, have a cup of cocoa in Fred, lock up Franklin, and drive to the post office in Betsy. She always hoped for a letter from someone, but all she ever got was bills. The reason the old woman never got any letters was because she had outlived every single one of her friends. This worried her. She didn't like the idea of being a lonely old woman without any friends, without anyone who she could call by name. So she began to name things, but she only named those things she knew she could never outlive. Her car Betsy had more get up and go than anything around. Her chair Fred had never sagged a day in his life, and not one creak or moan had ever been heard out of her old bed, Betsy. Her house Franklin had been standing straight for over 100 years, and still didn't look a day past 20. The old woman never worried about outliving any of them, and her days were happy. One day, when the old woman was out soaping some of the mud off of Betsy's tires and telling Franklin that he wouldn't be the same without a car that didn't keep its bumper a little cleaner, a shy brown puppy came up the old woman's gate. The old woman had not named the gate because 2 of its hinges had rusted off, and she couldn't tell if the gate wasn't long for this world. The shy brown puppy wagged its tail. It looked a little hungry, and the old woman stood beside Betsy and watched the puppy for a while. She said. Then she walked into Franklin, got a chunk of ham from her refrigerator, and came back outside. The old woman gave the ham to the hungry puppy and told it to go home. She told it that Betsy always had made puppies sick, and Fred never allowed puppies to sit on him, and Roxanne wasn't wide enough for a puppy, and the old woman fit on it. And besides all of this, Franklin couldn't tolerate dog hair, so the puppy went away. But the next day the puppy was back. The old woman was sitting in Fred reading a book, Everlasting Flowers, when she saw the puppy through her window. "Go home," she called to the puppy. The puppy wagged its tail when it saw her. "Go home," she called again. But the puppy just kept wagging, and the old woman noticed that it still looked a little hungry. So she went back to her refrigerator. She gave the puppy a hunk of cheese and 2 biscuits, and then she told it, "Go home." The puppy went away. That night, as the old woman plumped up the pillows on Roxanne, she thought about the puppy. It was a very nice puppy, she thought. It was a very pretty puppy, she thought. But it couldn't stay. If it stayed, she would have to give it a name. And she could never give it a name. Because it wouldn't last as long as Franklin, or Fred, or Betsy, or Roxanne. She might outlive it. And she didn't want to risk that. She didn't want to outlive any more friends. She would just keep telling it to go home. Every day the shy brown puppy came to the old woman's gate, and every day she fed it and told it to go home. Always it went away, and always it came back the next day. This went on for many months. The puppy got bigger and bigger and bigger until soon it wasn't a puppy anymore. It was a dog. And it was still a dog with no name. And all this time the old woman had gotten a new dresser that she had named Bill, and a new wheelbarrow that she had named Francine, and a new concrete pig for her garden that she had named Bud. But the dog she faithfully fed at her gate every day still had no name. Since it had no name, the old woman didn't have to worry about outliving it, and she thought herself pretty clever at this. Then, one day, The shy brown dog did not come to the old woman's house. She sat and fretted and watched the gate all day long, but the dog never came. The old woman felt so sad. The next day the dog did not come, and the old woman drove Betsy around town looking for the dog, but she did not find it. And the old woman felt even sadder. The following day, when still the dog did not come, the old woman knew she had to do something. She picked up her telephone and called the dog catcher. "Have you caught any shy brown dogs?" the old woman asked the dog catcher. "We've got a whole kennel full of shy brown dogs, ma'am," said the dog catcher. "Was yours wearing a collar with its name on it?" "No," said the old woman sadly, and she hung up the phone. The old woman sat and thought about the shy brown dog who had no collar with a name on it. Wherever it was, no one would know that it was supposed to come to the old woman's gate every day, and that she was supposed to feed it and tell it to go home every day. That things were always supposed to be this way. The shy brown dog had no collar, no name. No one would ever be able to know these things about it. The old woman made her decision. She locked up Franklin and drove Betsy to the dog catcher's kennel. And she said to the dog catcher, "I've come to find my dog." He asked her what color it was. "Brown," she said. He asked her how old it was. "About a year," she said. He asked her what his name was. The old woman thought. She thought and thought of all the old dear friends whose names she'd outlived. She thought of their smiling faces, remembered their lovely names, and she thought how lucky she had been to have known these friends. She thought what a lucky old woman she was. "My dog's name is Lucky," said the old dog catcher. She said to the dog catcher. He led her to a big yard full of white dogs and black dogs and brown dogs, and the old woman looked and looked and looked and looked, and finally she saw her old brown dog sitting beside the gate. The dog was looking out at Betsy, parked in the driveway. The old woman called out, "Here, Lucky!" And as the sound of her voice, the shy brown dog came running. From that day on, Lucky lived with the old woman, and he always came when his name was called. It turned out that Betsy didn't make dogs sick, and Fred was happy to allow a dog to sit on him, and Franklin really didn't mind a little bit of dog fare. And every night, Roxanne was sure to make herself plenty wide enough for a shy brown Lucky dog, and the old woman